This is going to be chapter 8 with radicals. So this is everything that deals with square roots, cubed roots, and so on and so forth. So one of the things that you guys are going to be seeing is something that looks like this. And this is what we call a square root. And most of us have seen what square roots are, whether it was in grade school or and in high school or in any other type of schooling that you had. But you have square roots. You also have something called a cubed root, and usually there's a little 3 on the side. This is what we're going to call a cubed root. And then just like that, we have 6th roots, we have 4th roots, we have 10th roots, we have many different things. So what exactly is a square root? Well, let's take it back a little bit. Usually when you have a number 2 and you square it, this means that you have 2 2's that you are basically multiplying, which gives you a 4. If you have 2 to the power of 3, so 2 cubed, this basically means that you have 3 2's, so 1, 2, and 3. 2 times 2 gives me 4, 4 times 2 gives me 8. Okay, so this is basically what it means to cube. Now, what you want to do with the root is that you're basically doing the opposite. You start off with this 4, and you want to think about what 2 numbers get to be multiplied to get a 4. So the way that you would write it, it would be square root of 4. And then you'd think about, okay, what 2 numbers am I squaring to get a 4? And that's going to be 2. Similarly, you have the cubed root. If I want to find the cubed root of 8, what 3 numbers, so that's what this 3 means. So this 3 just means what 3 numbers should I multiply together to get an 8? And the answer is going to be obviously a 2. So it deals with a lot of thinking. You can also use your calculator, and your calculator will actually be a really good resource. In your calculator, just look for the symbol. If you have the TI-30, is what you gotta put. Let me write it right here. If you have the TI-36, the TI-36X Pro, what you're gonna have to do is you're gonna press the second button, and it's a blue button all the way in the top, and then you're gonna press the X squared, because then in blue, you'll see that you see the square root. And you can also do the, and in order to do cubed root, for example, what you're gonna do, you're gonna press, oops, what am I doing? You're gonna press the second button also, the second, and then you're gonna see this button that says X with the little box on the top, and then what you're gonna write, and then you're gonna see this little thing that looks like that. So if you want to do a cubed root, the first thing that you're gonna do is you're gonna press the number 3. So press 3, then you're gonna press second, and then you're gonna press X with a little box, and you'll see that that's going to give you the cubed root, and you can do any root that you want. That's for the TI-36. The TI-30 is very similar as well. So let's do a couple of examples to try to do problems with square roots. So very simple. You can use your calculator if you want. So let's say we wanted to figure out what the square root of 49 is. Well, this is really easy because you need to think about what 2 numbers multiply together to get 49. That's just going to be 7. You can also use your calculator if you want. Then what about the square root of 144? Okay, well, the square root of 144, well, that's just going to be 12, because 12 times 12 give me 144. Okay. What about if I gave you this? The negative square root of 4. Okay? Now, this is, the first thing that you want to do is take the square root of 4. That's just going to give me 2. And then this negative is on the outside. So you're going to apply the negative right next to it. So you actually got a negative 2. The square root of 4 is 2, but there happens to be a negative on the front. Okay? Now, what about if I wanted to know the cubed root of 64? Okay, so now you got to think a little bit harder. So what times what will give me 64? Okay, well, if you know your times tables very well, then you would be able to get this really quickly. If not, just start using your calculator. Here the answer is going to be 4, because 4 times 4 gives me 16. 16 times 4 is going to give me a 64. Okay, you can also extend this to fractions. So if you want to do the square root of 25 divided by 64, one thing that you can do with the square roots is that you can take the square root of the top part, and then you can divide it by the square root of the bottom part. Okay, so the square root of 25 is just going to be 5. The square root of 64 is just going to give me 8. Okay, so that's going to be the answer. Let's say we wanted to do the square root of -4. Okay, so notice this is very different than this problem. Okay, so here the negative was on the outside. Here the negative's on the inside. Can you think of two numbers that can multiply together that are the same number that you can get a -4? And actually, there is a solution. So this one's going to be no real solution. Okay. Later on, you'll find out that there is a solution to it. It's just not real. It's what we call an imaginary solution. But this is no real solution. You cannot think of two numbers that multiply together to get a -4. Okay. So this is going to be one problem where so basically what you want is everything in the inside to be positive. Okay. Now, that's not always true, because if you had the cubed root of -8, well, this one, there is a solution to it. Okay, and actually the solution is -2. Now, why do you think the solution is -2? Well, if I multiply -2 3 different times, well, -2 times -2 gives me a +4. +4 times -2 is going to give me -8. So actually, when you have odd roots, you can have negative solutions. So let me make that quick note. So my note here is that odd roots can give both positive and negative solutions. Okay? Even roots cannot. Even roots only give positive solutions. So that's the only one that we have. Now, can you think of a square root that only gives you something that's not positive and something that's not negative? Well, the answer is square root of 0. Because square root of 0 is just 0. And 0 is not a positive or a negative number. Okay? So that's the only note that we have. Okay? Now, let's say we wanted to simplify a couple of radicals. So here's where the confusing portion is. I won't emphasize this as much on the exam. There might be like one problem to this, but you won't really need this until if you end up going to calculus. So I'll talk about it a little bit more. Oh, what happened to my thing? Okay, so let's say we want to simplify. Let's just write simplify odd and even roots. Okay, so let's try to simplify a couple of them. So I'm going to do a couple of examples first. So we know the square root of 4, well, that's just going to be equal to 2, because 2 times 2 gives me 4. We just found out that the square root of -4 is no real solution. Okay, so that's what we have. What about if I wanted to find the square root of 3 squared? Well, technically, because you are squaring it, right, you're going to get a 9. And then the square root of 9 is just going to give me 3. So the answer here is 3. Okay? And one thing that you can also think about is like, well, basically the square root is canceling out the square. So that's basically what's going on. Okay, now here, let's say we have the square root of -3 squared. Now you have to be very careful here, because with the cancellation, the square root and the square are not going to cancel out, because you're going to be left with a -3. And remember that this square root will always give you a positive number. So -3 squared is going to give you 9. Square root of 9 is also going to give me 3. Okay? Now let's say we wanted to do the cubed root of 8. We just found out that that was 2. Okay? And similarly, the cubed root of -8 is going to give me 2, but with a negative. Okay, so a couple observations. Square roots, you yield only a positive solution. Cubed roots, anything that's odd, gives you positive and negative solutions. Okay, now let's do one with variables. Okay, so now here we're going to introduce the variables. So let's say we want to do the square root of x squared. Okay, well, initially we think, well, this should be x, right? That should be the answer, because kind of like the square root and the square cancels, but be very careful. That would be true if x is positive, right? But what about if x was negative, kind of like how it was here? We could fall in the trap that, well, if we get rid of it, we'll end up with a negative. So that's not quite what we want. So whenever you see a square root or a fourth root of an even number, even power, what you're going to do is you're going to put absolute value here. Okay, so here's where you're going to put the absolute value, because the square root of x squared can be a positive or a negative number, and just to make sure that it makes it positive, we're going to apply these absolute values. Okay, so what do you think is going to happen when you take the square root or the fourth root of p to the power of 4? Okay, well, the answer here is, well, what times what times what times what will give me p to the fourth? The answer here is p. And now we're going to apply absolute value, okay? So we're going to apply that absolute value there, okay? What about the sixth root of p to the sixth power? Same thing, absolute value of p, okay? Now, that's not going to be true when you have a cubed root, because if you take the cubed root of m cubed, well, the answer is going to be m, but we don't need absolute value here, because with the cubed root, you can have both a positive and a negative solution. So that's why m here will just be the solution, okay? Because m can be both a positive and a negative number, okay? What about if we had the fourth root of a to the power of 6, okay? And we're going to do problems like this in a little bit. The answer here actually is a cubed, okay? And if you want to know why, watch this next video that I'm going to put, and you'll see why. So it is a cubed, but remember, we want to put absolute value, because with the even root, you cannot have a positive or a negative. It only has to be positive. So it's going to be the absolute value of a cubed. Now, be very careful, because when you have the square root of x to the power of 4, here the answer is x squared. Now, you might want to put absolute value here, right? But actually here it's not necessary. Now, why do you think it's not necessary? Well, it's not necessary because x squared will always give you a positive answer. So even if I had a negative value like negative 3 squared is going to make it positive. So that's why we don't add absolute value here. Okay, so basically all we just want to know is that absolute value, okay, add an absolute value, okay, when you simplify even roots with variables, okay? So anything that has a square root, a fourth root, a sixth root, so on and so forth, and that you're taking out or you're basically simplifying, that's when you're going to add absolute value. So in the next video, we're going to do more problems like these, and I'll show you how to simplify things with variables.